He came back ready to throw me out. Then 300 wolves stood up and blocked his path. The Alpha King had been gone 9 months. 9 months of war, of blood, of the sort of violence that reshapes a man's bones. When he left, the stores were full. When he returned, the storerooms were bare. And I was living in the healer's hut wearing his pack's colors. He demanded to know who had fed his pack through the famine. No one answered. They only looked at me. He came back ready to throw me out. Then 300 wolves stood up and blocked his path. I had spent 9 months learning the weight of silence. 9 months of watching the pack move through the rhythms of survival, while I moved through the edges of their world, never quite inside it. The Alpha King had been gone 9 months, and in that time I had learned what the pack would not tell him when he returned. He came back changed. The war had reshaped his bones, or perhaps it had only revealed what was already there. He stood at the edge of the village square, mud caked to his boots, a fresh scar pulling at the corner of his mouth, and he looked at me the way a man looks at something he intends to remove. I was standing outside the healer's hut. My journal was tucked into my belt, the brass latch cold against my hip. My hands were still, my shoulders forward, my breathing measured. I had been expecting this. The Alpha's voice carried across the square. "Who is that?" He meant me. He did not remember my name. He had never needed to. The pack's warriors did not answer. They formed a wall between us, 300 of them, silent and unmoving. The Alpha's face shifted through confusion into something harder. He had not expected resistance. He had expected to return to a pack that would follow his word without question. "Step aside," he said. No one moved. I watched his hand go to the knife at his belt. I watched the eldest warrior, a woman named Soren, whose grey hair was braided with wolf's teeth, plant her feet and meet his gaze. Soren had been Alpha before him 20 years ago, and she had stepped down when her son died in a border skirmish. She had not spoken in council since. She did not speak now. She only stood. The Alpha's eyes found mine again. "You? What have you done?" I did not answer. I had learned that answers given too soon are answers wasted. The story began 9 months before, when the Alpha left for war. The pack's stores were full. The winter had been predicted mild by the elders who read the signs in the migration patterns of the caribou and the thickness of the bark on the old pines. The Alpha had kissed his mate, had clasped the shoulders of his warriors, had promised to return before the first snow. He did not return before the first snow. He did not return before the second. The frost came deep that year. It came early, and it came with a hunger that the elders had not foreseen. The caribou moved south before the pack could follow. The old pines cracked in the cold, the streams froze solid by the second month of winter, and the game that remained grew thin and wary. By the third month, the pack was starving. I watched it happen from my place at the edges. I was the Omega, the refugee, the healer's apprentice from a pack that no longer existed. I slept in the healer's hut, on a pallet of straw near the fire, and I woke each morning to the sound of children crying from hunger and the smell of broth made from boiled bones and nothing else. The healer, a woman named Kara, whose hands were steady and whose voice was soft, did not ask me to help. She simply left herbs on the table and trusted me to know what to do with them. I had been trained in a different tradition, one that knew the plants of the deep forest and the roots that grew beneath the frost. Kara's knowledge was of wounds and fevers, mine was of survival. I began moving at night. The first time I crossed the eastern border into the contested territory that the pack had ceded to the Raven clan 3 years before. I walked for 2 hours through snow that reached my thighs, my journal tucked inside my vest, my breath clouding in the dark. I found the winter mushrooms that grew on the north faces of the old oaks, the ones that the Raven clan did not know to harvest. I filled my satchel and walked back before dawn. I left the mushrooms at the edge of the healer's hut covered with frost and said nothing. The second time I went west, into the territory of the stone wolves, a pack that had no reason to welcome me and every reason to kill a stranger on their land. I moved through their forest like a ghost, reading the signs of their hunting parties in the broken twigs and the displaced snow. I found a cache of dried meat that their hunters had buried against the spring thaw. I took a quarter of it. I left a pouch of dried herbs in its place, the kind that eased the pain of old wounds as payment. The third time I was caught. A Raven clan scout found me at dawn half frozen, my satchel full of roots that grew only in the deep crevasses of the eastern cliffs. He was young, barely 16, with a spear in his hand and fear in his eyes. I did not run. I sat down in the snow and showed him the herbs I had gathered. I told him in the trade tongue that I had learned from the merchants who passed through before the war, that I was a healer, that I meant no harm, that I would share what I found. He could have killed me. He should have killed me. Instead, he took the pouch of dried fever root that I offered and let me go. I returned to the pack's territory with my satchel full and my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did not tell anyone what had happened. I left the roots with Kara and went to sleep. And when I woke, the broth was thicker than it had been the day before. The pack noticed. They did not speak of it. They did not ask where the food came from. But the caches that I left at the edge of the territory were not disturbed by the wrong hands. The warriors who patrolled the borders began leaving small offerings of their own, a piece of dried meat, a handful of berries, as if to say, "We see you, we do not understand you, but we will not stop you." By the 5th month, I had crossed every border within a day's walk. I had traded with the Raven clan, the Stone Wolves, the Broken Antler pack that lived in the marshes to the south. I had learned their languages, their customs, their fears. I had built a network of small debts and smaller favors, each one a thread that I wove into a net. By the 7th month, the pack was no longer starving. By the 9th month, when the Alpha returned, the storerooms were full again. The Alpha did not know any of this. He had returned expecting to find his pack as he had left them, strong, proud, dependent on him. He had returned expecting to find me as he had left me, small, silent, grateful for the scraps of shelter I had been given. Instead, he found a pack that did not need him, and he found me standing in the center of the square, 300 wolves at my back, my journal in my hand. I pulled the journal from my belt and held it out. "This is where I kept the records," I said, "every trip, every pound, every name." She pulled the journal from her belt and held it out. The brass latch caught the firelight as she opened it to the first page. The Alpha King took it with hands that had gripped swords through 9 months of war. His fingers, calloused and scarred, looked almost clumsy against the worn leather cover. He turned the pages slowly, his dark eyes moving across the cramped handwriting that filled every line. The first entry was dated the 3rd week after his departure. A single sentence: storeroom inspection. Grain stores at 60% of expected capacity. Hunting parties report deer migration shifted south. He turned another page. The handwriting became smaller, denser, as if the writer had been running out of room and time. Deep frost arrived early, ground frozen solid by the 2nd moon. No mushrooms, no roots, no edible bark within safe territory. The Alpha's jaw tightened. He knew what came next. He had heard the reports from his surviving warriors, the ones who had returned to find their families gaunt and hollow-eyed. Page after page, the journal told a story he had not been present for. 3rd hunting party returned empty. 4th hunting party lost 2 wolves to a territorial dispute with the river pack. 5th hunting party did not return. He stopped at an entry marked with a small star in the margin. "I cannot watch them starve. The healer's apprentice taught me which plants are safe. The contested borderlands have nettle, dandelion, wild garlic. I will go at dusk." The Alpha looked up from the journal. His voice was rough. "You crossed into contested territory alone." She did not answer. She did not have to. He returned to the pages. The entries grew longer, more detailed, more desperate. 4th trip across the eastern border. Found a patch of wild carrots. Harvested 3 pounds. Left a bundle of dried mint as trade for the Riverpack scout who caught me. The Alpha's hand had started to shake. He set the journal down on a flat stone and pressed his palm flat against it, as if steadying the page would steady himself. "Negotiated with hostile packs," he said. It was not a question. The eldest warrior standing behind her spoke. She traded her own crafted goods, dried herbs, woven baskets, medicinal salves. She knew what they needed, and she offered it before they could demand a price. The Alpha turned to the back of the journal. The final pages were not narrative entries. They were ledgers, columns of numbers, dates, locations. 47 trips, 3,200 pounds. The ink was red below the total, as if she had pressed the pen harder on purpose. 3,200 pounds of food, medicine, and supplies, carried on her back through frozen forests and hostile territory. While he was at war, she had fought a different kind of battle. One without glory, without witnesses, without anyone to remember her name if she did not come back. He closed the journal. The latch clicked shut. You did this alone. She stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her, her pale grey-green eyes fixed on a point somewhere past his shoulder. The firelight caught the silver wire-rimmed glasses, the small crescent moon pendant resting against her collarbone. No, she said quietly. I did it with the pack. The Alpha's brow furrowed. The pack did not know. They knew. She gestured to the circle of warriors around them. They left the caches undisturbed. They covered my tracks when I returned late. They did not ask questions they did not want the answers to. One of the warriors, a broad-shouldered woman with grey streaking her dark hair, stepped forward. We knew. We did not stop her because we could not, and because we would not. The Alpha's voice dropped. You let an Omega risk her life for the pack's survival, every single night for months. We let her choose. The warrior's voice was steady. She chose us. We chose to protect her choice. The silence that followed was heavy with everything that had not been said. The Alpha looked at the journal again, at the worn leather, the brass latch, the pages that held the record of a woman who had done what none of his warriors had done. He remembered her now. He had seen her at the edges of the village, always moving quietly, always with her head down. He had never spoken to her. He had never asked her name. He had assumed she was nothing, because that was what the pack had taught him to assume about Omegas. He had been wrong. How did you survive all? He asked. The cold, the hunger, the scouts who caught you? She reached into her belt and pulled out a small pouch. She untied the drawstring and poured a handful of dried leaves into her palm. The healer taught me. Every plant has a use. Every root has a purpose. The ones that kill are the ones you do not know. She held out the leaves. He took one and crushed it between his fingers. The smell was sharp, earthy, unfamiliar. These grow in the contested lands, she said. They stop bleeding. They dull pain. They keep the body warm when the cold tries to take it. I traded them for grain. I traded them for passage. I traded them for the lives of your pack. He dropped the leaf. It fell to the mud at his feet. Why? The word came out raw, stripped of authority. You were not pack. You had no obligation. You could have left. You could have watched us starve and walked away with nothing but your own survival. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that was not submission. It was something older, something that had been forged in the same fire that had burned through his war. A pack is not blood, she said. A pack is who shows up when the fire goes out. The words landed like stones in still water. The Alpha stared at her, his mouth open, his hands hanging at his sides. He had led warriors through battlefields that would have broken lesser men. He had watched friends die and kept marching. He had done everything a king was supposed to do, and he had been outdone by a woman he had never bothered to see. He dropped the journal. It landed in the mud with a soft thud. His voice was barely a whisper. What did they promise you in return? She did not answer. She bent down, picked up the journal, wiped the mud from the cover with her sleeve, and tucked it back into her belt. The brass latch caught the firelight one last time as she straightened. Nothing, she said. They promised me nothing, and I asked for nothing. The Alpha's knees buckled. He caught himself on the stone well, his knuckles white against the rusted iron crank. The pack watched in silence, their eyes moving between their king and the Omega who had saved them. The eldest warrior stepped forward. His voice carried across the square, steady and final. She asked for nothing, so we are offering her everything. The Alpha stared at the numbers. You did this alone? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The journal lay open in his hands, the pages covered in her small, precise handwriting. 47 trips, 3,200 pounds of food. Every entry dated, every source noted, every trade recorded. The ink was sometimes smudged, sometimes uneven, as if written by a hand that had been shaking from cold or exhaustion. He looked up at her standing in the mud of the village square, the grey light of dusk catching the silver wire-rimmed glasses. Her copper-red braid had come loose in places, strands of it sticking to her cheek. She did not meet his eyes. She was looking past him, at the ring of warriors who had stepped between them, at the 300 wolves who had stood up when he came back ready to throw her out. He had been gone 9 months. 9 months of war, of blood, of the sort of violence that reshapes a man's bones. He had returned to a pack that should have been starving. Instead, the storerooms were full. The children had fat on their cheeks. The elders had not been left to die in the snow. And the Omega, the woman he had never once looked at, never once spoken to, never once acknowledged as anything other than a mouth to feed, was standing at the center of it all. The Alpha turned the page. More numbers, more names. She had traded with the River Pack, the Stone Pack, the Broken Tooth Pack. She had crossed borders that were forbidden to anyone without rank, let alone an Omega. She had walked into hostile territory alone, carrying nothing but a pouch of dried herbs and a leather-bound journal with a brass latch. The eldest warrior, a man named Torben, who had not spoken a word since the Alpha's return, stepped forward. He was old, his beard white, his left hand missing 2 fingers from a fight 30 years past. He placed a hand on the Alpha's shoulder, and the Alpha looked up at him. "She crossed the Grey River," Torben said. His voice was rough, like stone grinding against stone. 3 times. The current took her once. She came back with a broken rib and a sack of dried fish. The Alpha stared at him. "You let her go?" "We did not let her go," Torben said. "We did not know. She left at night. She returned before dawn. She left the caches at the edge of the territory. We found them when we woke." The Alpha looked back at the journal. His hands were shaking. He did not notice. He was a man who had killed with his bare hands, who had led a pack through war, who had never once doubted his own strength. And now he was holding a book written by a woman he had planned to exile, and his hands were shaking. He turned to the last page. The entry was dated 3 days before his return. It was short. The handwriting was different, calmer, steadier, as if she had written it sitting by a fire with nothing pressing. "The pack is whole, the stores are full. The Alpha will return soon. I do not know if he will remember me. I do not know if he will want to, but the pack is whole. That is enough." The Alpha closed the journal. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in the 3 years she had been living at the edge of his territory. She was small, slightly stooped, shoulders forward, the posture of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. The silver crescent moon pendant on the thin chain around her neck caught the light from the brazier. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the ground, at her scuffed black leather boots, at the mud that clung to the hem of her worn charcoal grey wool tunic. "What did they promise you in return?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. He did not know why he was whispering. The question felt too heavy to speak aloud. She looked up then. Her pale grey-green eyes met his. There was no anger in them, no fear, just a quiet patience, the patience of someone who had been waiting for a long time. "Nothing," she said. "They offered, I refused." The Alpha stared at her. "You refused payment?" "I did not do it for payment." "Then why?" She did not answer immediately. She reached down and touched the journal at her belt, the small leather-bound book with the brass latch that had become her signature object, the thing she always carried, the thing that held her secrets. She did not open it. She just touched it, as if checking that it was still there. "Because I could," she said. The Alpha opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He had spent 9 months fighting a war. He had killed men who had done less to him than she had done for him. He had returned expecting to find his pack broken, expecting to take control, expecting to be the savior. And instead, he had found that he was not needed, that he had never been needed, that the person he had planned to throw out had done what he could not. Torben stepped forward again. The old warrior's voice was quiet, but it carried through the square like a drumbeat. "She crossed the Grey River alone. She traded with packs that have not spoken to us in a generation. She bartered, she hunted, she foraged. She came back with wounds that she did not show anyone. She did not ask for help. She did not ask for recognition. She did not ask for anything." The Alpha looked at him. "How do you know all of this?" "Because I followed her," Torben said. "The 3rd time she crossed the river, I woke when she left. I thought she was deserting. I followed her to the Grey River, and I watched her wade into the current. I watched her swim across. I watched her trade with the river pack, a bag of dried herbs for a quarter of a deer. I watched her swim back. I watched her leave the cache at the edge of the territory, and I watched her walk back to the healer's hut, bleeding from a cut on her leg that she did not clean until she was inside." The Alpha's jaw tightened. "You did not tell anyone." She asked me not to. And you listened to an Omega. Torben met his eyes. She was not an Omega when she crossed that river. She was the only person in this pack who was willing to do what needed to be done. The Alpha dropped the journal. It landed in the mud with a soft thud, the pages already darkening at the edges where the water seeped in. He did not pick it up. He stood there, his hands empty, his chest hollow, the weight of 9 months of war and 3 years of neglect pressing down on him like a stone. What did they promise you? He asked again. His voice was barely a whisper. The other packs. What did they promise you in return for the trade? She looked at him. Her eyes were steady. A promise that they would not attack while I was feeding your people. The Alpha stared at her. You negotiated a non-aggression pact with 3 packs while you were foraging for food. I did not call it that, she said. I called it a favor. They called it a debt. I told them I would repay it when I could. With what? She touched the journal again. With knowledge, with herbs, with the things I know that they do not. The Alpha looked at the journal lying in the mud. He looked at the ring of warriors, at the 300 wolves who had stood up when he came back, ready to throw her out. He looked at Torben, the eldest warrior, who had followed her across a river and kept her secret. He looked at the healer's hut where she had been living, where she had been sleeping on a pallet on the floor while the pack slept warm in their beds. He looked at her, at the copper-red hair, the pale grey-green eyes, the small silver crescent moon pendant, the leather-bound journal with the brass latch. At the woman who had done what he could not, who had asked for nothing, who had expected nothing, who had given everything. He knelt, the mud soaked through the knees of his trousers. He did not care. He looked up at her, and he said the words that he had never said to anyone in his life. I was wrong. She did not speak. She did not move. She just stood there, her hands at her sides, her gaze fixed on the ground, the journal at her belt, the weight of everything she had done pressing down on her shoulders. The eldest warrior stepped forward and spoke for the first time since the Alpha's return. His voice was rough, like stone grinding against stone, but it carried through the square like a drumbeat. She asked for nothing, so we are offering her everything. The eldest warrior stepped forward and spoke for the first time. His voice was the sound of stone grinding against stone, a voice that had not been used in council for more than a decade. He was old, older than anyone in the pack, older than the Alpha's father had been when he died. His name was Torben, and he had seen 3 Alpha Kings rise and fall. He had watched the pack shrink and grow and shrink again. He had buried more wolves than he had trained. He said, she asked for nothing, so we are offering her everything. The words settled into the air like ash after a fire. No one moved. The Alpha stood frozen, his hand still half extended toward the journal where it lay in the mud. The Omega did not move either. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her shoulders slightly stooped, the leather journal still at her feet where the Alpha had dropped it. Her pale grey-green eyes were fixed on a point somewhere beyond the crowd, as if she was reading something written on the mist that curled between the huts. Torben walked forward. He was tall, though age had bowed his spine, and he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned that nothing good came from haste. When he reached the Omega, he stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he bent down, picked up the journal, and held it out to her with both hands. She took it. Her fingers were steady. The brass latch clicked as she tucked it back into her belt. Torben turned to face the pack. We have been discussing this since the first night the caches appeared, he said. Since the night I found a bundle of dried venison at the edge of the territory, wrapped in leather, tied with a strip of cloth that had been torn from a dress she wore when she arrived. I recognized the fabric. I had seen her mending it in the healer's hut, sewing by candlelight, her fingers moving slow because she was still learning to sew. He paused. The pack was silent. I did not tell anyone what I found, Torben continued. I waited, I watched. Every night she went out. Every morning something new appeared. Roots, grain, dried fish, a haunch of something that had been hunted and butchered and carried back across 3 miles of frozen ground. I followed her once. She walked for 6 hours. She crossed into the territory of the Red Fang pack, which had killed 3 of our scouts the previous spring. She spoke to their sentry. She traded a pouch of dried herbs for a sack of oats. The sentry let her pass. I do not know what she said. I do not know how she convinced him. But she came back with the oats, and she left them at the edge of the territory, and she walked back to the healer's hut and fell asleep on the floor because she was too tired to reach her cot. The alpha's face had gone pale. His hands were shaking. He did not seem to notice. I followed her every night for 2 weeks, Torben said. I watched her cross borders that would have meant death for any of us. I watched her negotiate with packs that had sworn to kill us. I watched her trade things she had made with her own hands, salves, poultices, dried herbs, woven bands, for food that she carried back through the dark. She never kept any of it for herself. She brought it all back. She left it where someone would find it. Then she went back to the healer's hut and slept on the floor because her hands were blistered and her feet were bleeding, and she did not have the strength to climb onto the cot. The Omega's face was expressionless, but her hand had moved to the journal at her belt, her fingers resting on the brass latch as if it were a talisman. Torben turned to face her directly. I told the elders what I had seen. We met in secret. We discussed what to do. Some said we should bring her before the pack, give her the recognition she had earned. Others said we should wait, that the Alpha would return, that it was not our place to decide. We argued for 3 nights. We could not agree. He paused. Then, the hunting party came back empty-handed for the 5th time, and the children started coughing, and the healer said that if we did not find food in the next 2 weeks, we would lose the youngest ones. He looked at the pack. We stopped arguing. We started helping her. The Alpha's head snapped up. What? Torben did not flinch. We left the caches undisturbed. We made sure no one followed her. We covered her tracks when she returned. We told the scouts to look the other way when she crossed the borders. We gave her the best hunting knives, the warmest cloaks, the driest boots. We did it in secret, because we knew that if she was caught, we would have to claim we knew nothing. But we knew everything. The Alpha's voice was barely a whisper. You knew, all of you knew, and you did not tell me. You were at war, Torben said. You were fighting for our survival in a different way. We did not tell you because we did not want to distract you. We did not tell you because we were ashamed. Ashamed of what? That we had treated her as less than nothing for 3 years. That she had more reason to hate us than to help us. That when the famine came, the only person willing to risk her life for this pack was the person we had exiled to the edges of our fire. The Alpha looked at the Omega. She met his gaze. Her face was still calm, still unreadable, but her fingers had tightened on the journal's latch. Why? He asked. The word came out raw, stripped of all authority. Why did you do it? She did not answer immediately. She looked down at the journal, then at the crowd of wolves who had stood between her and his fury. She looked at the young wolf who had brought the woven bracelet, still holding it in his small hands, his eyes wide and unblinking. Then she said, "Because I could." The words were simple, flat, final. The Alpha waited. She did not elaborate. That is not an answer, he said. It is the only answer I have. He stared at her. The silence stretched. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the forest, a branch broke under the weight of frost. The Alpha closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed. The fury was gone. What remained was something else, something that looked like grief, or shame, or both. He dropped to his knees. The pack went still. No one breathed. The Alpha knelt in the mud, his head bowed, his hands resting on his thighs. He did not speak. He did not need to. The gesture was older than language, older than the pack, older than the wolves themselves. It was the posture of surrender, of acknowledgement, of a leader admitting that he had been wrong and that he was asking for forgiveness. The Omega looked at him. Her jaw tightened. Her hand moved away from the journal. "Get up," she said. He did not move. "Get up," she repeated. "I did not do this so you would kneel to me." "Then what did you do it for?" he asked, his voice muffled, his eyes still fixed on the ground. She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I did it because I remembered what it felt like to be hungry. I remembered the winter my pack died. I remembered the cold and the silence and the way the snow covered everything so completely that you could not tell where the bodies ended and the ground began. I remembered what it was like to be alone, with no one coming, no one searching, no one bringing food." She paused. "I did not want anyone in this pack to feel that, not even the ones who hated me." The Alpha looked up. His eyes were wet. He did not wipe them. "I am sorry," he said. She nodded once. "I know." He stayed on his knees for another moment. Then he stood slowly, as if the weight of what he had just done was settling into his bones. He looked at the pack. He looked at Torben. He looked at the young wolf still clutching the bracelet. Then he looked at the Omega. "What do you want?" he asked. She did not answer. She reached into her belt and pulled out the journal. She opened it to the last page, the page she had written on before the Alpha returned, the page that held the question she had been asking herself every night for 9 months. She looked at the words she had written. Then she closed the journal, tucked it back into her belt, and met the Alpha's eyes. "I want to stay," she said. "But I want to stay as something other than what I was." The Alpha nodded. He turned to the pack. "Then that is what you will be," he said. The eldest warrior stepped forward and spoke for the first time. "She asked for nothing, so we are offering her everything." The eldest warrior stepped forward and spoke for the first time. His voice was the sound of stones grinding together in a riverbed. "She asked for nothing, so we are offering her everything." The square went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The Alpha King stood frozen, his hand still covering his mouth, his eyes moving from the warrior to the Omega and back again. He had been gone 9 months. He had returned expecting to find his pack diminished, starving, desperate. Instead, he found them full-bellied and defiant, standing between him and the woman he had been ready to cast out. The Omega did not move. Her copper-red braid hung over one shoulder, catching the amber light of the single iron brazier. Her silver wire-rimmed glasses reflected the flames. She stood exactly as she had when he first arrived, slightly stooped, shoulders forward, hands at her sides, the same posture she had held for 3 years as an Omega, the same posture she now held as the center of every eye in the village. The eldest warrior took another step forward. He was old enough to have been Alpha before this Alpha was born. His beard was white, his back was bowed, but his voice carried the weight of decades. "You left us to die," he said to the Alpha, "not by choice. You went to war because the council demanded it. But you left, and when the frost came, when the game fled, when the stores ran dry, you were not here." The Alpha's jaw tightened. His hands unclenched and clenched again. "I came back as soon as the campaign ended." "You came back 3 weeks after the last cache was laid," the eldest warrior said. 3 weeks after the Omega walked into the healer's hut with a fever and a gash from her shoulder to her elbow, still carrying a sack of dried venison on her back. The Omega's eyes dropped to the mud. She did not speak. She never spoke when the attention was on her. That was the thing the pack had learned over the long months. She did not perform her suffering. She simply endured it and moved on to the next task. The Alpha's gaze found her again. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked up. Her pale grey-green eyes met his. "You were not here to tell." The words landed like a blade between ribs. He flinched. The pack saw it. The eldest warrior saw it. The Omega saw it. She did not look away. The eldest warrior spoke again. "We have discussed this. Every elder, every hunter, every mother who watched her children eat because of what this woman carried through the snow." He paused. "We have decided. She is no longer Omega." The Alpha's expression shifted. Confusion, then understanding, then something that looked almost like relief. "You want to raise her rank?" "We want to give her a place," the eldest warrior corrected. "A seat at the council, a voice in the decisions, a name that is spoken with respect, not with the back of the hand." The Alpha turned to the Omega. "Do you accept?" She was silent for a long moment. The journal was still in her hand, the brass latch cool against her palm. She had written every name in that book, every trip, every pound, every negotiation with packs that would have killed her if they knew who she was. She had done it without expectation of reward. She had done it because she could. But now they were offering her something she had never had. Not status, not gratitude, a home. She looked at the Alpha. "I have one condition," his eyebrows rose. "Name it." She closed the journal and tucked it into her belt. "You will learn every plant I know, every trail I walked, every negotiation I made. You will learn it, and you will teach it to the next generation, and they will teach it to theirs. Because if you ever leave again, if any Alpha ever leaves again, the pack will not need to rely on an Omega who was never supposed to be there." The Alpha stared at her. Then he knelt. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was slow, deliberate. The movement of a man who had spent 9 months killing and had forgotten how to bend. His knee hit the mud, his head lowered, his voice, when it came, was rough. "I will learn." The pack exhaled. The tension in the square broke like ice, giving way to spring. The eldest warrior placed a hand on the Omega's shoulder, a touch that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. She did not flinch. The celebration began quietly. Someone brought out a cask of mead that had been hidden through the famine. Someone else lit torches around the square. The boy who had placed the woven bracelet at her feet earlier now sat at her side, watching her with the unwavering devotion of a child who had been saved and knew it. The Omega sat at the main fire for the first time. The flames warmed her face. The pack's voices rose around her. Laughter, stories, the sound of people who had survived something together. She did not join the conversation, she never did, but she listened. The Alpha found her an hour later, sitting apart from the crowd, her journal open on her lap. He sat down beside her without asking permission. "I read the entries," he said. "The ones about the rival pack scout. The night you talked your way out with dried herbs," she nodded. "How did you know what to say?" She looked at him. "I paid attention, I watched them. I learned what they valued, what they feared, what they needed." She paused. "You can do the same, you just have to stop assuming you already know everything." He did not argue. He sat in silence for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I was wrong about you," he said finally. "I was wrong the day you arrived, and I was wrong every day after." "I know," she said. There was no bitterness in her voice, only fact. He almost smiled. "What now?" She closed the journal and stood. The crescent moon pendant caught the firelight. "Now we build something that does not break when you leave." She walked back toward the healer's hut. Behind her, the pack's celebration continued. The Alpha watched her go. He did not follow. At the door of the healer's hut, she paused. The journal was in her hand. She opened it to a blank page, the first clean leaf in months. The firelight from the square reached just far enough to illuminate the paper. She knelt beside the fire and opened her journal to a blank page. The first word she wrote was not a name, it was a question. "What now?" She looked up at the stars. The pack was singing. The Alpha was watching her from across the square. The boy with the bracelet was asleep against his mother's shoulder. She dipped her pen again. "What now?" she wrote beneath the question. "We keep going, we keep learning, we keep showing up when the fire goes out." She closed the journal, latched the brass clasp, and tucked it into her belt. Then she walked back to the fire, sat down beside the eldest warrior, and let herself be home.